Welcome back. In a moment, we'll continue to examine the environmental impact of diesel emissions. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. Police in India have seized more than 9 million rupees since the federal government removed the country's largest denomination bills from circulation. The cash, worth roughly $140,000, was confiscated from tax-avoiding Indians hurrying to exchange their now illegitimate currency for smaller amounts. Thailand will begin building the funeral pyre for their late king next year. King Bhumibol Adulyadej, who died last month, aged 88, was the world's longest reigning monarch. The government has said that 8,000 people will be involved in the cremation ceremony. And the US President Barack Obama has said he will not rule out publicly criticizing a Trump government once he's out of office. By convention, former presidents avoid commenting on the actions of their successors. But Mr. Obama suggested that he may voice opposition to the Trump administration if he felt core American values were being threatened. Well, back now to our discussion about the dangers from diesel and the pollutants that are helping to create air pollution crisis in cities around the world. Before we examine who should be taking responsibility for tackling this public health emergency, let's give you an idea of the scale of the problem. The World Health Organization says that air pollution is responsible for an estimated 7 million premature deaths every year. That makes it a comparable threat to smoking, high cholesterol and obesity. The UN body says that just 12% of the cities it monitors have air quality that meets its acceptable standards. The WHO measures air quality by particulate matter 2.5, fine particles made up mostly of emissions from diesel engines, the burning of coal and the operation of waste incinerators. A level of 10 micrograms per cubic metre is considered acceptable. But the air quality of almost 2,500 cities worldwide is above that level. Among the highest measurements ever recorded, the Saudi capital Riyadh, Delhi in India and Kampala in Uganda. Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined by Ariba Hamid, who's a senior campaigner at Greenpeace, and still with us is the environmental journalist Fiona Harvey. Ariba Hamid, why do you think governments are apparently so reluctant to address this issue?
Your guess is as good as mine, because I think the government is primarily responsible for addressing this issue. But what they've done in turn that we've seen is the dieselization of fleets, which has led us to this problem. The people were encouraged explicitly to buy diesel engines. And it wasn't unknown, the NOx problem wasn't unknown. It was left to the industry to actually sort out the NOx problem. It was left to the testing regime, which has now turned out to be utterly in shambles. So the government actually needs to step up to the plate and rein in the industry. We, for example, are asking the UK government to end the sale of diesel cars that are continuing to pollute much more in the real world than in the labs.
Just end all diesel car sales?
As long as
because, as we've discussed already, they're not, it's the concentration of cars that's the real problem here, isn't it? You can use diesel cars in the countryside perfectly okay.
Well, 4 out of 5 brand new diesel cars are polluting up to 15 times more than what is allowed. If there were any other, on NOx, and if there was any other product that was not doing what is said on the tin or wasn't fit for purpose, the government wouldn't be allowed to be sold to people. So why are different standards for diesel cars? Unless and until the industry gets its act together, and this real-world measures, we've been hearing about them coming, but also there's been quite a pushback from the industry to delay them every year. And I don't think we've seen the state of air quality across the world, and I don't think we can wait anymore.
Fiona, why do you think consumers seem to be relatively unaware about this? I mean, they're still buying cars, or they're still commuting into cities, even though that might be damaging their health.
I think you have to say that for most people, it's not their fault. People were sold diesel cars in the belief that they were green.
That was then. This is now. You make a decision, or somebody makes a decision every day to get in a car, if it's a diesel car, and drive into a city. And it might be anywhere. It might be in Riyadh. But by so doing, they could be damaging their or their neighbour's health, couldn't they?
Yes, but it's really only in the last few years, although some of us have had worries about this for a long time, as Greenpeace has, it's really only in the last few years that we've seen rising public awareness of this. And we have seen people change their minds about diesel cars in the wake of some of this publicity, which is a good thing.
Figures and things
Yeah,
like
so
that,
people are responding. But the problem is that, very few people buy a new car very often, which is probably a good thing in many ways because, because of the waste and scrappage.
And in fact, replacement cycles have got longer, haven't they?
The replacement
so after
cycles,
3 years, 4 years, maybe 5 years before you change.
Exactly, and cars have a long second-hand life as well.
Yeah.
So there's an immense time lag in the system. And so we really need not just to tackle the new cars that are coming along, although that must be a priority, but we also need to look at the cars that are actually on our roads and what we can do about them.
I mean, if it is needed for people to get into cities, and cities must work and business must, the daily life must go on, isn't it incumbent on city authorities to clean the air up?
Yes, it is. I think it's a combination of, like Fiona said, both the new cars and the cars that are on our roads right now. So, for example, in London, we've seen the Clean Air Zone proposal, the ultra-low emission zone, which is penalising the older cars in order to phase them out. And that is the right way to go. And actually, we'll have to reduce the total number of cars on the roads to be able to improve air quality eventually. They'll have to be electric and hybrid, but also the traffic can't go increasing in a business as usual scenario.
But intra-government targets, pan-European targets and stuff are just being flouted, aren't they? They're just being ignored.
Yeah, the UK has been paying fines for not meeting air quality over the last 4 or 5 years now. And that is why Client Earth took them to court twice, and they've been defeated twice. In fact, the new plans from the government are now being expected. So there's that problem. And then there's a problem which you can potentially undo all that you've done by adding new cars, which are polluting much more than they should. So two approaches are needed, and I think in London we can see how that goes, but ultimately the national government will have to take responsibility.
When you say new cars are polluting much more than they should, they don't pollute at all, according to the theory. In theory, do they?
Yeah, they haven't broken any laws, and I think that's the tragedy of the testing regime. We've seen that it doesn't work. This has been more than 1 year after the VW scandal, and every major diesel brand is polluting up to 15 times more in the real world than in the labs. And that is unacceptable.
What do you think is one of the answers here in terms of mobilising public opinion then, Fiona? Because unless you get diesel car drivers to change habits, nothing much is going to change here. It doesn't seem like the authorities are going to change it, do they?
Well, diesel car drivers are already changing somewhat, as we've seen, but we need regulation, we need proper regulation, and we also
quite a few regulations. You need regulations that work, don't you?
Well, we need regulations that are properly enforced and that have teeth. We also need the tax system to be more responsive. So, for instance, at the moment in the UK, the tax on diesel and the tax on petrol is the same. But that's not really reflecting the real world either, because diesel cars do many more miles to the gallon. So if the tax on diesel fuel was raised compared with petrol, then that would be more of a level playing field. Also, we can use the tax system to encourage electric cars, which are far cleaner.
Well, as we've talked about, I mean, at the moment, that's still just an industry on the way up. Would you see huge discounts for clean fuels like electric and so on being a good idea as a way to try and change habits and therefore clean the air up?
Absolutely. It's interesting that we're talking just ahead of the autumn statement, which is out on Wednesday, which could have been a potential opportunity to change the vehicle excise duty, which actually encourages people to buy diesel. We shouldn't be having that kind of a structure anymore. And it doesn't encourage people to buy hybrids, for example. So I think there are opportunities and we should grab them. Also, infrastructure, charging points. If more cities had charging points and tax breaks for buying electric vehicles, I think we'll be seeing a totally different picture in cities altogether. Okay.
Abid Hamid, Fiona Harvey, thank you both very much indeed. We end our programme with Insight Bite. This is just a little something that we feel you should know about. Today, it's Iceland's tourism industry. Since the 2010 eruption of an Icelandic volcano, the small Scandinavian nation has adapted to the increased threat with savvy self-promotion. The eruption grounded flights and wrought havoc for the tourism industry across the world. But now the country is promoting itself as a tourism hotspot, with lava, geysers and hot springs complementing its already rough and picturesque terrain. And to accompany their newfound touristic appeal, the government has also been steadily preparing its people, its buildings and its infrastructure to deal with another volcanic event. And that's all for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Inside.
Bye.